Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Happy Monday. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're tuning in from. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Let's see. Okay. There we go. I have the presentation open. All right. I did want to, in case folks that aren't on Facebook, I found out on Friday night that I got into the NYBG Cultivators program. So, yeah, super excited. It still hasn't like felt real yet, but really excited. And yeah, we're doing like our onboarding event in a few weeks. So yeah, I'm just woo. I was just thinking like, oh my gosh, all the content I'm gonna be able to make. It's just amazing. And they were telling us that they were telling all that the graduates basically a lot of folks that have graduated from the program have gone on to make TV shows and have book deals and stuff, and that yeah, that they like help with that kind of thing. And so I'm like even more excited. Yeah, because I have a book that I'm working on, and a houseplant book, and that would be amazing if I can get some extra support on that. So yeah, guys, it's happening. So really. Yes, Connie. So it's for the New York Botanical Garden, which is located here in Bronx, New York. It's our largest garden, and they are just a prestigious, organization where they have classes, they do education, and so basically what they're offering is they're selecting a very few basically folks to have kind of backstage access. So basically we get behind the scenes um, kind of options. There's a course that's specifically for us. And yeah, and it's a kind of a partnership for us to help promote the message of the garden, which is, plant love. And then be able to use the grounds and the resources to then get educational plant content out to the public. So really excited. They were only choosing a handful of people. And this is a way for me also. I volunteered there before, but it's a way for me to see the garden from a completely different perspective, because we'll be meeting with like different area managers basically, and they were explaining that we'd be able to do like some behind the scenes tours and things like that. So yes, I am like beyond elated, and it's it's yet another awesome excuse to go to that garden. It's an amazing garden. I volunteered a lot in their herbarium. I did their urban naturalist education track. So the plethora of knowledge teeming out of that place. And also I've become lifelong friends with a lot of those professors as well, that we still to this day connect even years after I've taken their classes. We still I still go on bird walks with my with the birding instructor. So it's, yeah, man, I'm so excited, really excited. And yeah, it's like a whole other thing to do with NYBG. And yeah, so this is going to be really great because I can do kind of like species highlights, like a biome also. So they have different greenhouses that reflect different types of environments. I'm gonna be able to do a bunch of written content, and I'm gonna be able to do a lot of video content. And so, yeah, I'll be able to bring that all to you. And I'm so yeah. And we were supposed to be onboarded in the middle of July, and then we start from there. So yeah, so it'll be coming up, and I'll be able to share my experience and everything with all of you, and get that get things recorded for you. So it's yeah. So let me see here. Okay. Alrighty. So I wanted to kind of follow along the botany track and just talk more, so do a little short class on just kind of an intro to botany, but um through the vein of talking about leaf morphology, and then talking a little bit more about different parts of plants, and then just some fun facts, some of my favorite fun facts about plants. So I'm going to share that with you today. Yeah, and then let me open up this presentation. There we go. I found some really cool videos. So this should look really cool, I hope. Let's try it. All righty. So I'll switch to presentation mode. And there we go. All right. So again, welcome everyone to another class with the Urban Garden Learning Series. And yeah, where I offer different classes, Q&As, plant clinics, open forums. I definitely invite folks, if you have topics, especially for the open forum days, let me know. If you want to talk about your collection. We've had so many people share like stories and how they grow certain plants. I seriously, I have to get a pineapple. So I need to start growing my own pineapple, but I just love all of our collective information. And so if any of you feel free, just let me know. You can totally take the floor and do a class if you wanted to. It's open. So please, and don't feel shy. We're all just here to connect about plants. So feel free to. So getting to know plants. So I love this image of a botanical garden. It's just absolutely beautiful. I'm in love with this whole type of kind of the way that they decorate. They'll place layers of plants like that, and so that once they grow out, it's this real like jungle feel, like you feel like you're immersed in a jungle. Absolutely love this. When we went to some botanical gardens, especially in Costa Rica, this was the vibe. You were literally getting hit in the face with leaves, but it absolutely beautiful. Yeah, it's so definitely wanted to show you that. I actually wanted to just introduce you to some basic parts of the leaf too. So this is a simple leaf. Now there are different types of leaves. There are leaves that have lobes, and so you can think of that as let me see, I'll grab here this this monstera. So these fenestrations basically are serving as lobes on these leaves, right? So the inner part here of the leaf is called a sinus, this little kind of like where the valley is, and that these peaks, these like chunks of plant material on the leaf are then considered lobes. So they kind of become their own little individual lobe. Now, the leaf that you're seeing on this screen is an example of a simple leaf. So I always, when I'm teaching botany, I always start off with the simple leaf. So we'll use, for the sake of that simplicity, we'll direct it that way. So yeah, now leaves, they have two sides. So the top side, so there is the abaxial and the adaxial, and the adaxial is the top, and the abaxial is the back part of the leaf. And so always just remember the back. the abaxial is the back of the leaf. So we have here, just to kind of show you, so leaves, they can be connected at the base with a petiole. So this is a small stem that then attaches to the main stem. Now, some leaves don't have a petiole. Some leaves are sessile. They just completely directly just connect to the main stem. But you'll be looking for a petiole in some plants. Definitely you'll have that. Then the midvein. So so you can see here, it really depends on the groupings of the plants. Their vein structure can differ greatly. But if you're ever trying to, especially, so the reason I wanted, how this pertains to houseplants especially, is once you kind of learn the orientation of the leaf, it's really good to then be able to narrow down what might be happening to your plant. So usually if you start to see any browning right at the base of the leaf, so if you kind of learn, okay, so the apice is the tip, there's that base. If I'm starting to see browning at that base, sometimes that can actually be indicative of root rot, for instance. If something is happening more at the tip, at the apice of the leaf, or the apex of the leaf, then that can be a couple of other things. That could be a pest. It could be that it's a little dehydrated. It could be some type of disease, right? And so kind of where does the problem kind of start, right? So if you kind of learn how to orient yourself a little bit, it's very, very helpful. And then also in terms of the veining, so you see that midvein. So the midvein is the primary vein, and then you get these kind of secondary or tertiary veins that are kind of coming from that main vein. Now, there we go. So sometimes certain issues with your plants, you might develop spots on the plants, right? Or things like that, where you can kind of see, are they happening at the center and then kind of moving to the edges of the plant? So that would be ex-medial. So that means that something is happening to the leaf that is happening from the midvein and kind of progressing outward. Or is it happening admedially, where it's happening on the edges of the leaf and then it's kind of working its way towards the center of the leaf, right? So it's just a little bit of orientation of the leaf. And this really, really helps when trying to narrow down what's going on with your leaf. And also if you're trying to key out a plant as well. So if, for instance, you have a plant, you have no idea what it is, or you're learning plant identification in the field, then knowing that orientation, so how you kind of explain this proximity to the midvein of, maybe there are, lines on the plant that are part of just like some variegation or a very specific marking that would be an identifying factor for you to kind of figure out the plant. So again, understanding that orientation when you're looking at those books that will help you do, it's called to key it out, it makes it so much easier. So it's just a little brief introduction to this kind of leaf orientation. And again, the top part is the adaxial and the back part is the abaxial. And sometimes the abaxial and the adaxial are incredibly different shades. We see that in houseplants where like some calatheas, for instance, or marantas, under the leaves might appear like a more burgundy color. You can see certain types of, for instance, like the scindapsus, their type of variegation is called blister variegation, and it's something that you see on top of the leaf, and on the back you kind of just get like a very like a shimmery silver back. So those can be very strikingly different, and these are for different reasons. It's theorized that with the plants that have the kind of red backs, they tend to be in higher light situations, or they're trying to lower light situations, and they're trying to reflect that light back up. And so when they're kind of clustered together, having that kind of red in the coloring is apparently helps amplify that lighting in darker areas. I was just watching something on that, and I thought that was really interesting because I've never heard of that. So yeah, just something cool, but yeah, kind of introducing that. But there are so many different parts of plants, and this is just an intro, so it's very, very brief. But I kind of wanted to take you through some aerial parts of plants that you might encounter that are really great for identifying factors, right? So in terms of course, the stems and the leaves, they can be so distinctly, so distinct, right? That you might come to know a plant and there's no other leaf shape that is like that. And then there's others that have a lot of lookalikes, right? And it kind of takes a little bit more effort to really find out what you might be looking at. But stems, especially on woody plants, they can be incredibly helpful in identifying your plant, not only in the range of color, but also in terms of things like the leaf scars. So you can see bundle scars, so the vessels inside of the plants. When a leaf comes off, it leaves behind a little scar, and you'll see sometimes there's dots, sometimes it looks like a happy face. It can look like so many different things, but basically this is where the plant created what is called an abscission layer, and it basically has this, it kind of like, think of it like cauterizing a wound. It kind of creates this barrier between the petiole and the stem because it wants that leaf to fall off. Why? Could be a bunch of reasons. Maybe the leaf itself is unhealthy. Sometimes when the plant is actually very stressed, maybe it doesn't have enough water, it's not getting enough nutrition, it might drop some leaves, so that might be another option. Or it's a process called senescence where the plant is deciduous and it's fall time, and it's very common for them to just drop their leaves. So there's a multitude of reasons why a plant might want to drop a leaf just itself without it having been snapped off. But when it does, it tends to leave that scar, and that becomes really, really helpful in identifying it. And so when you start kind of going into that, like leaf scar identification, also bud identification. So on the stems, before the leaves emerge, there can be buds, right? And this is also very, very different across different genera, so different groups of plants. And this can also be very, very indicative of the species or the group of species. So you can know, well, I don't know what kind of oak it is, for instance, but I have it narrowed down. I know it's definitely an oak. But that's better than where you were in your right, in your kind of figuring out of that plant. So that is something else I'd love to teach down the line, if that is something that is very interesting to folks. If you are interested in like leaf scars and buds, if that is something that you'd like in the future, let me know. I was trying to create a survey to put out with today's reminder email, but it wasn't letting me kind of input it. So I'm going to have to send it separately. But for potential options for other classes that I could offer through this series. So I do classes for different organizations, all on really different subjects, but I do want to make them accessible through this program as well. So if any of those topics, when you see that survey, it'll include things like birding, forest ecology, urban ecology, invasive species identification and management. So it will be mainly North American species because I am here in North America, but if that would be of interest, yeah, so there's a couple of classes that I'd like to offer through the series, and I'd love to gauge folks' interest levels. So keep an eye out for that survey. Seeds, so many seeds. I definitely can do a whole class on seeds if that is ever of interest. There are so many different types. There are seeds that have defense mechanisms. There are seeds that even have the ability to send out kind of chemical signals. So it's called the seeds that are allelopathic. And so there are some that are capable of essentially suppressing other seeds that are in their vicinity from germinating. So they kind of keep them in this just dormant state, and they're able to develop and kind of take over in that area. It's crazy all the things that seeds can do. And the packaging of seeds. So some seeds are encapsulated in fleshy fruit in comparison to what is called dry fruit, these kind of dry pods. So they're still considered fruit. How they're also expelled from the plant can differ so differently. So some you have to actually crack something open, or in other ways, like with the Torah, for instance, once it dries, it pops open and all the seeds come out. I love the plants that shoot their seeds. They have this really fun dispersal method in which they, once they get dry enough, sometimes it's also for touch. If you brush up against the plant, like touch me nots, the impatiens, they will actually shoot out their seeds. With partridge pea, partridge pea. Those were a lot of fun. It was a really hot day in September. It was actually, I was at the New York Botanical Garden for class, and I was walking by this row that's all partridge peas. And I did not know about their seed dispersal method, and it was hot. It was such a hot day. And the seeds were completely developed. The seed pods were, they look like little string beans. They were completely matured, ready to go. And in the heat, basically the resins around the plant, those little kind of seams right around the edge of those pods, it kind of breaks off. And now with the heat and the buildup of the pressure, as the heat kind of breaks down that edge, they start to open up and they start to shoot out their seeds. So I was walking by and I just kept hearing click, 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 click. And I was like, what is that sound? It was just this like constant click, 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 click. And I'll try to find the video because I completely forgot about that until this moment, but I got it on video, where you can't see the seeds, of course, but you can hear all the clicking. And they were just shooting out their seeds, and that is their dispersal method. It's really, really fun. There's a wonderful book I highly recommend called The Triumph of Seeds. Amazing book. If you're really just wanting to kind of fall in love with seeds and learn some really cool fun facts, it's not a book that is very kind of, if you're looking for like an academic book, I don't think that that's probably not the book for you. But if you are just kind of getting interested and you just want to read a book about someone who just is inspired by seeds, and the author was basically teaching his son about seeds, and he was kind of re-falling in love with the magic that are seeds, and he started doing interviews and kind of finding out more about all the ways that seeds develop. It's such a really, really fun book, so I highly recommend. There is also an audiobook version that you can find if you'd prefer, but it's a very short book, really, really fun. Highly recommend. And then there are different types of bark as well. So this, of course, is for woody plants, but this is something that you would definitely be able to use in order to identify groups of trees specifically. Of course, there are shrubs as well, but trees are the most notable of having these really, really different types of there's the bark can be just so drastically different. It can be incredibly thick, it can be very thin. With trees, they all have what are called lenticels. So there's these pores basically that allow for gas exchange from the outside with the living tissue that is actually in the tree. It does need oxygen, and so sometimes if the bark is very thin, like that of cherry or birch, those lenticels are very, very, very visible. And then versus thicker trunks, something like like an oak, or even like a maple, much thicker, has these furrows, so you can't really see those lenticels. But really in those trees, that living tissue is just a couple inches closest to that protective layering. And if you're not aware, this is something that a lot of people, there are actual tree poachers. So if you've never known about that, there are poachers for trees. And they exploit this fact by a process called ring barking. And so what they do is they go to like national parks or protected areas, and they will ring bark a tree. And so sometimes they have a special tool for it. Sometimes it's done with a knife, but usually there is a tool specifically for that. And you can go basically at your level and just kind of you go or completely around the base of the trunk of the tree with this tool, and it cuts a couple inches in. And what this is doing, it's actually cutting off those vessels that are transporting water and sugar. So it's disrupting the xylem and the phloem of the tree, and essentially cuts off the top part of the tree to the bottom part of the tree. So the top part of the tree starts to die. This is a not very fast process, but it starts to die. And then eventually, of course, the trunk will die because it's not able to photosynthesize or anything. But what happens is then the tree is dying, or is dead, and now it becomes a liability risk. So for people that might be going into the forest and hiking and things like that. So what ends up happening is that usually the park, if there's a lot of trees that look like they're dying or anything like that, they might hire a contractor to cut them down. So some parks will leave trees there for the wildlife, but others might, if let's say there's a lot of them, they might actually hire the contractor not only to cut the tree, but also to haul the tree off. And so what these poachers that were caught, some were caught, there's still poachers out there, but what they were doing is essentially they had relationships with the contractors. And so they would go and purposely destroy trees that were like very desirable for carpentry. So things like black cherry, some ash, which, gosh, ash trees are are not having a good time. We've lost so many ash trees, especially to the emerald ash borer. So they are under threat. Even over the weekend, Brian and I, we went up to Albany, and on the way there, it was really scary. There were just swaths of trees that were completely dead, just completely dead. So you're walking, you're just you're driving, or you're kind of walking through these wooded areas, and I got some video when we were driving, and it's just these great lush trees, and then just sections of just dead trees. And so, trees right now our trees are under threat from disease, from invasive insect species, right? There's just so much going on. And then to add this to the mix, definitely not helpful, especially for species that, are kind of are getting to that point where they're going to approach threatened, and then maybe enter, into endangered species status. So it's very unfortunate, but bark is meant to be that protective layer of a plant. And it looks so different on each plant. It changes also as the trees mature or your shrubs mature. It looks very, very different. So yeah, it's something that if you want to dive in even more into that, there's also a great book called Bark that I highly recommend as well. And it really deep dives into bark itself. Again, I could do a whole class on bark. So let me know if that's something of interest. In terms of flowers too, there are some fun flowers that you might not know about. So the ones that we tend to know about are called chasmogamous flowers. And so what these actually are flowers that are exposed to the air, essentially. They're on the top side of the plant, they're above the soil. Now, chasmogamous refers to basically the Latin derived word is kind of like marriage open, so it's an open marriage. What it translates to, and essentially this means it's open. So some plants are able to have flowers that will self-pollinate. Others they might have a male flower versus a female flower, or they will need to get pollinated by another, and they won't be able to self-pollinate. So of course the mechanics of of pollination can differ very, very greatly, but these flowers, at least the ones that are above the soil, are known as chasmogamous. And this is just because they're just exposed to the world. There are also flowers that are under the soil, and one great example are violet flowers, and this is called cleistogamous, and this actually means closed marriage. I love etymology. So when I see these terms, I always want to look up the etymology, and sometimes it's just it's a good laugh. But yeah, these flowers, I'll show you a picture in a moment. They actually exist below the soil, and it's kind of like a backup plan. So if the violet flowers are consumed, they don't make seeds. They are very delicious. Violet flowers are incredibly delicious, and they're great for teas and and tinctures as well. So not surprising that the plant has some backup flowers to ensure, right, its genetic legacy, just in case it does make these kind of backup seeds that develop below the soil surface, just so that it can definitely have a chance to continue growing. And then with fruit, as I mentioned, there are different types of fruit. When we think fruit, we usually think fleshy fruit. We're thinking of things like these berries, right? Or we think of like an orange, right? A papaya. But there is dry fruit. So these are things like those seed pods that we see on plants that are like rock hard. They're not for you to necessarily eat them, though. There are some seed pods that are edible in that they are used medicinally. But that aside, usually that's not something that folks are eating. Yeah, like walnuts, for instance, you'll break that and you'll get what they call the nut meat inside, right? And so that is an example of a dry fruit. It's just that dry outside seed pod that's holding those seeds. And that's another class I would be happy to break down those. We can do one on fleshy fruit and one on dry fruit if you'd kind of want to do a deeper dive into that. And so here's that picture of Cleistogamous flowers. So those are violet flowers that are growing beneath the soil. They're completely white. They have no need to have chlorophyll because they're not exposed to sunlight. So they are white. They kind of look very alien-like, but they do develop seeds. They're just clones of the mother plant. So it's just a fun fact there, if you might not have been aware. Also, as I mentioned, there are fruits. So this is a lot of parts that might be happening, that might be developing underground for certain plants. So there are some fruits, for instance, like a dry fruit, an example of a dry fruit, like a peanut, that do develop underground. So that is another fun fact. And then there are types of organs, plant organs that develop for a myriad of reasons. So for some plants, it might be for to kind of help propagate themselves, kind of spread themselves around. So this might be with rhizomes. So you might know this is ginger. We call it ginger root, but it's actually not a root, it's a rhizome. And rhizomes are modified stems that are growing either right beneath the soil, or sometimes they're growing parallel to the soil. They're kind of just like right on top of the soil. And they do have that capacity, though, if you do break them into pieces, to create a genetically new plant, genetically identical plant, I mean, to the mother plant, but it has that capacity. You can also cut it up into into pieces and create more more than just one plant with one big chunk. And so they do have that capacity. So it's called totipotency. So it just means this ability to kind of spawn a new plant. And so rhizomes have that ability, and there's so many different examples of rhizomes. But you might see that with if you have like snake plants, when you look at the base and how they're creating their pups, they'll create these kind of, they kind of look like they're running kind of parallel to the base of the pot, and then they'll spring up a baby. But you could cut that and separate the plants as well. But you start to kind of see this. It's really, really cool with your house plants too. Even plants that you might end up putting outside, they might, especially, I have to warn you, with plants like mint, especially spearmint or peppermint, they will take over your yard. So they will spread with runners. And yeah, you'll like grab one and a bunch of them will be linked. They will take over your yard. So they are a very aggressive, prolific species. So be warned, if you want to grow mint, please do it in like an enclosed, either like an enclosed garden bed or in a pot, because they will take over your yard. So just being warned. There's also different types of tubers. So sometimes plants want to save up energy, save up starches, right? So this could be for plants that die back in the winter. Sometimes it's kind of just the backup for them to have. And there's different types of tubers. There are root tubers. So something like potatoes is considered a root tuber. Then there are things called stolons that are stem tubers. So their root tubers are attached to the roots. Stem tubers are still attached to basically the base of the stem, and then there are roots. And so examples of like a stem tuber would be like a like cassava. That would be an example. So they might do this. So they'll have that backup plan, right? There is nourishment. And a lot of those tubers too also have the capacity to become an entirely new plant. So if you've ever had a sweet potato or a regular potato, right, that you forget about in your cabinet and then it starts sprouting, that is a whole new potato plant growing, and that can totally happen. The same with bulbs. And so there's also bulbs. So something cool about bulbs is they have this basal plate where they have the roots. There are different types of bulbs. There's tunicate or imbricate bulbs, and then non-tunicate bulbs. So something like garlic and onion, for instance, are an example of tunicate bulbs, where they have that papery kind of covering that develops over them, and that's supposed to protect the bulb from pathogens like disease, also from like fungus, and from dehydrating as well. It's just like these layers of protection. And then the bulb itself is broken up into layers, and these layers are actually food for the bud that is deep inside in the center. And so that will grow and become a flower. And so and then there's bulbs that have no layering. They might have no layering. And then there's corms. So corms look like bulbs. I included a little picture here. But corms look very much like bulbs, but they have no layers. And it's just like one solid chunk of starch. And yeah, they tend to be a lot smaller. But things that grow from corms, we know alocasias grow from corms. There's also some flowers like, oh my gosh, it was for crocus. There we go. Crocus will also grow from corms as well. So just kind of showing you some really cool other plant parts that you might not have encountered before. Now, not all plants produce these types of parts, but it's just a cool wide variety that are produced by plants. And of course, roots. I should have mentioned roots here, but there are so many different types of roots. There are tap roots. There are like fibrous roots. There are roots that are aerial roots. So if you have any aroids, if you have any plants like monstera or philodendron, even pothos, right, the epiprenums, you're very familiar with air roots. So they'll create these aerial roots that will stick to these poles that you might be having them climb. They can also stick to our walls. I recently had that happen with one of my monsteras in our bedroom. It had this really big aerial root and it got stuck on the wall, and I was trying to pull it very lightly, but it left a mark, so I'm gonna have to paint that part of the wall again. But yeah, they're very, very effective in terms of climbing. Yeah, so just watch out for your walls. So I wanted to take a moment and also touch on plant blindness. So this is also sometimes referred to as green blindness. And so basically this concept is that a lot of folks, I mean, the folks that are here obviously see plants for what they are. You might have houseplants at home, might be thinking about getting houseplants, but you definitely have an appreciation for plants. And what has actually happened is that there are some folks that they just don't, quite literally, their brain doesn't register plants anymore. So plants kind of have become this background kind of thing. It's like as if it's just like background decoration. They don't see, they'll look out into trees, for instance, and they won't notice that the trees might be shaped differently or look differently. You might it's just become this really odd phenomena where folks will just not see plants. They'll look out into a lawn, right? And someone who can really recognize, and it's not just about identifying plants, but more so it's just being able to kind of register these differences. So sometimes if you look out onto your lawn, you might have a bunch of other plants that are not, let's say, grass, right? So you might see certain types of small flowers, or maybe something that folks consider weeds, but you'll see that there are different layers, right, to that lawn. It's not just straight grass. But then some folks that have plant blindness, they will look out into a lawn and they will only see grass. They won't, it's like their brain will not register the other types of plants. This is a really, really odd thing, but it's something that's been extensively written about. There are books, but there's a remedy, of course, and this is if someone were to spark an interest in plants, get interested in plants. This actually tends to solve the issue. So folks will start to like have noticeable differences where they'll start to actually go, oh my gosh, did I always have this oak tree, right down the block, where they finally kind of really start to pick up on the world around them more, in terms of like the plant life. It's very, very interesting. I actually had a student way back that was just learning about plants. And I still remember she came to one of my walks and I introduced her to a bunch of plants, and she texted me the very next day and told me, I walked out of my building and I realized there is a giant burdock in our tree pit and it's big. So this plant didn't spring up overnight. It's definitely been there for at least a couple weeks. And she did not even notice it until after my walk. And so it's like you start to get, once you're exposed to different plants, it's like your brain starts to register it. And so now you see them everywhere and they've been there, but it's just your brain wasn't picking them up. It's really, really interesting. So I always wanted like touching on this when I'm talking about like introductions to botany, because this is something really interesting that I've found is it's so odd, but it's something that has happened, and the theories are basically, well, before folks, we needed to know, we lived in rural communities, like in terms of humanity, we lived in more rural communities. We needed to know plants for food, for medicine, also to know what not to eat, right, to recognize poisonous species. But then as humans became more urbanized and we started kind of shifting in that, like societally, folks just didn't really, and now there's stores, right? We're not growing our own food. Folks can just go to a market and pick up what they need to get. We've lost that need to learn plants from a young age. So our brains are no longer trained. So while we might recognize, of course, basic things like different types of fruits or things we would pick up at the market, of course, like vegetables, it's very different when it comes to outdoor plants. You might recognize the way that the let's say an apple looks, right? When you pick it up at the store, but if you were standing in front of an apple tree that had no fruit on it, you might not recognize that tree. So it's a really, really interesting kind of phenomena, and yeah, it's something that, of course, is kind of developed over time. But then there was a really great talk I saw about plant blindness and about the dangers of plant blindness. So essentially you might think, well, it's not very useful information anymore, right? Who not, people living in New York City, you're not growing your own crops. You might not, there's no need for you to know about these plants. But one of the dangers, though, is if someone who doesn't have, has plant blindness, let's say, and they kind of don't register the plants, so they don't see them around them, so they don't cultivate an appreciation for them, then this could be very dangerous, because what if this person becomes part of a board that wants to destroy this whole chunk of forest, right, to put a parking lot or something. It's also about cultivating empathy for the plants and the wildlife around you. and that it's been kind of linked to plant blindness. So it's just a really interesting concept I wanted to share with you. I definitely invite you to, if this is very interesting, I don't know, it was really interesting to me. If it's very interesting to you, definitely there are TED Talks about plant blindness. There are a lot of videos on YouTube about it. And there's like articles and books that you can really pick up if you're interested in that. But yeah, plant blindness, it's also known as green blindness. But yes, it can be cured. So that is something. And then I just wanted to share a couple fun facts with you before I open it up for questions. But there's this amazing photographer, Craig Burrows. I invite you to look up more of his work. But he had done this really cool photo series. And it turns out that flowers, that they have this ability to fluoresce. And so they essentially absorb and reflect light back out. And this could be moonlight, especially. And so for animals that are able to see in, in these different like levels of light, they're actually able to see flowers completely differently to how we see them. And it's really cool how beautiful this could potentially be looking to, let's say, a bee, or, to an insect, to a moth at night, that the flowers actually glow. It's absolutely beautiful, and we can't see it unless we, of course, use special cameras and special lighting. But otherwise, this is just normal for, let's say, a moth, but not for us. And he has this entire series. It's all flowers that that he has set up this way, and it really just changes how you can see them. So this is something definitely to explore. It's so beautiful. Also, plants do actually have like an electrical charge. So it's a negative electrical charge. It's very minute in terms of human to plant, but for insects, this is something that also can help them navigate towards certain plants. And these charges will be concentrated in different sections of the flower. And so, for instance, they might be concentrated on the tips of the petals, right? So it kind of is showing where the bee, it's kind of like I made a little runway here, but basically it's kind of showing the bee to the flower and to where the nectar is, essentially, where the pollen is. And because this is a symbiotic relationship, so the bee is getting nectar, it's also picking up pollen that it wants to eat as well, that it brings back to the hive. But there's all this excess pollen, and so as it's moving from flower to flower, it's helping cross-pollinate as well. But really cool fun fact about flowers. Also, the ability that plants have to actually distinguish between the types of vibrations. So there's a wonderful book called What a Plant Knows that really goes into this much more in depth. But basically, that plants, they are able to, over time, learn the distinction between different types of vibrations that can be caused by just like wind versus, a predator that's actively attacking the plant and chomping on it. Here isn't, oh yeah, there we go. I thought I had the picture next, but I'll show you that one next. But it can actually just sense that stimuli and kind of, it's very anthropomorphizing, but like make a decision. But basically it just it knows essentially when it should react and when it shouldn't. So certain plants, for instance, if they're being chewed up, they can send certain chemicals to their leaves, for instance, that will make their leaves much more bitter. And so it can at least try to save some of the leaves, so it doesn't get completely eaten by whatever insect might be attacking it, or herbivore. In the book of the Hidden Life of Trees, there's a section where they're talking about giraffes eating acacia trees, and how the acacia that's getting eaten will then send chemical signals out, and that this will kind of tell the other leaves higher above or around the tree to kind of pump all those bitter compounds into their leaves, so that once it moves on to another section of the tree, it's like, okay, this doesn't taste good, and it moves on. And so they actually can distinguish this, and there's been really cool experiments, and to kind of learn and distinguish to see how the plants are able to distinguish this. They can also sense things like running water. So sometimes you might have heard of like urban trees, street trees that have destroyed pipes because they end up wrapping around the pipe or actually going through a pipe. So plants can sense the vibration. They can kind of find water like that. And yeah, it kind of also helps the plant kind of learn when it needs to be on alert, right? And so what kind of stimuli needs it to be on alert, versus when it's just something in passing, like rain or wind, where it's something it wouldn't have to worry about. And what's really cool is that there was this really cool experiment on Mimosa pudica, which are called sensitive plants. And basically there are these plants, you can buy them as house plants, where you touch them and they close. And these plants were used on various experiments because they wanted to kind of work with plant memory and see how plants retained memory. And they did some experiments where they would repeatedly drop this plant down a chute, like a protected chute, so it would just land face up. But every time at first, when it would hit the floor, it would close, right, automatically. And then over time, the experiment was repeated over and over and over again, and the plant would stop closing because it would realize that this wasn't like a danger type of situation. And so it would stop closing. It would just remain open. And then when they would experiment with ones that were never dropped, they would continue to close. And ones that had been repeatedly dropped, they stopped closing over time. They just stayed open. They might respond to other experiments. They would like touch them, which was very different, and they would close, but they would repeat the whole process of dropping them, and they would learn that they didn't have to close. It was really, really interesting. There's so many books. I'm trying to think, that one I think is called Brilliant Green. And I'm trying to remember another one that talked about that, but it's something you can actually, if you just wanted to look up like the studies, you can absolutely do that. So it's Mimosa pudica, so the sensitive plant and plant memory. So really, really cool fun fact. So as I mentioned, so with trees, plants in general, but a lot of trees will actually have that capacity where if they're getting chewed on, they can alert other parts of the tree itself, right? So they kind of alert other sections of themselves. But what also happens is some plants will actually have kind of create a very specific chemical cocktail that they then release as a gas, right? And so this also gets to their other leaves much faster than the chemical signals might travel through the tree. But when the wind picks up, right, these gases can go to another tree and end up kind of warning it before it actually gets attacked by, let's say, an insect or being chewed up by an herbivore. And so what ends up happening is that it can alert them, and they will start to pump out these chemical compounds where they won't be very tasty to whatever is wanting to eat them. So it can be very helpful in that regard. But there's also certain trees and plants also, but that can send out chemical signals for predatory insects. So especially things like parasitic wasps. So this is an example of what a parasitic wasp can do. And so what the plant will basically send out this chemical signal, and the predatory wasp is alerted that there's food, essentially, and it'll come. And what they do is they actually lay their eggs on caterpillars. You see this with in elm trees. Elms do this. You also see this in tomato plants. So if you're familiar with tomato hornworms, that you might see them, they're kind of covered in these, like, they look like Tic Tacs, but they're actually wasp larvae. And in this regard, it's same, wasp larvae of a different species. But basically these, the caterpillar becomes a host, it becomes a meal for the wasp larvae. And so they become attached to it. Sometimes they're inside of it and they will essentially kill the caterpillar, and because they're eating it from the inside out. Or sometimes the eggs are kind of attached like an anchor onto the caterpillar, and then they hatch, and then the larva consume the caterpillar like this from the outside. I mean, it's a pretty horrific death for the caterpillar, but the parasitic wasps really help kind of even that out. It's a really weird type of food source and method of delivery, but plants have been found to actually be able to call out for help. It's really, really cool. There was some really cool experiments where they put bags, essentially like giant, like plastic bags, over young trees so that it would be airtight. And then they had sensors, and then one tree would purposely have caterpillars added to it versus the next tree that was the same size, it was the same species. Yeah, they would basically capture these gases, and yeah, they were releasing gases, you know, and yeah, and then the trees that weren't getting it weren't aware. It was really, really cool. So yeah, this is another real fun fact. Oh, here's just an example. That's the one I meant to put in the other. But yeah, when plants are getting destroyed by by beetles or caterpillars or anything like that, or just herbivores in general. And sometimes what was really interesting is I also read about that for some trees and just plants in general, that are able to actually recognize the saliva, so the chemical makeup of the herbivores, you know, or insect, whatever it is that's eating them, they will actually, if this is a relationship that they've had, you know, built up over millennia. Of course, it's for plants, especially like host species, where they will create it's kind of like antibodies. So think of it like that, so that the plant kind of recognizes that saliva, and then it will specifically generate a chemical cocktail that would help ward off that specific kind of you know, caterpillar, for instance. So it'll know over time that, okay, this mix of chemicals will be bitter enough where it won't eat as much of me as it would have. So really, really cool. There also been a lot of I mean, you can see this with phototropism, where plants do appear to see light. They respond to different waves of light, but they also have that capacity to move towards it, but they can also move away from it. And so phototropism is when plant movement that's being caused by light, but there's also scototropism, and this is when plants might be moving away from light. And then this is something that you see with some vining plants like pothos, where they will, or also like English ivy, where they will want to climb up a tree. And so you will, they're actually moving away from the direct light and into like towards what's creating the shade. and there's actually been really cool things that I've been starting to dive into fairly recently, where plants seem to have the appear to have the ability to also have some way of maybe with the bouncing of light, but to at least kind of see shapes. And so, of course, they don't have eyes. It's the way that they're just somehow able to perceive these shapes. And there was a really cool thing about a specific type of parasitic plant. I'm forgetting the name of it. But essentially what it does is it blends in with the plant that it's parasitizing. So it'll make its leaves look like the plant. And there was an experiment done where they thought that it was doing it because it would tap into the plant and access like its DNA. And somehow it had the capacity to shapeshift its leaves to look like the plant it was parasitizing. But then this experiment was done where that plant was placed on a plastic tree, where it was not parasitizing that tree actively. It could not tap into it. Sorry, Maple, my cat, he seems to have the zoomies right now. But it was a plastic tree. It wasn't something that the tree could actually eat. I'm sorry, that the parasite could actually eat. And it still changed its leaves to look like the plastic tree. Very weird, very, very weird. So that's something more I'm diving into, but they appear to be able to have like this ability to recognize shapes that are next to them. So really cool. Also that specifically a lot of like these plants that are parasites, this is an example of a mistletoe, which is a parasitic plant that will grow on trees. But these parasitic plants, it appears that they actually do have this ability to kind of sense the plant that they want to parasitize. So there was this really cool experiment with dodder plants, and so that's DODDER. And they did is they basically had the dodder plant, and then they created a slurry of barley, one of tomato, and they really dodder plants really like tomato plants. And so they put these slurries on little Q-tips on cotton swabs and place them in the soil in different parts, like at different distances. And the dodder plants would go towards the tomatoes to parasitize, because it sensed that that was the tomato, and it would go in that direction. It kept growing in that direction. So there's some really cool experiments like that, but it seems that some plants are able to actually pick up on these things. And so this is kind of parallel to that ability to recognize the saliva, right, of certain animals that might be eating the plant. It seems that this kind of has a similar kind of reaction to that type of stimuli. There's also this really cool experiment that was done because roots apparently crackle at 200 hertz. And so there was these really cool experiments where they would have seedlings, and then they would use little microphones and kind of do play crackling of roots. And the younger seedlings would kind of start growing towards where these other roots were. And there's different theories, of course, but I think that the most possible theory would be, oh, he's playing with a ball, sorry. But is that because it's hearing the roots are able to sense those vibrations, the seedling is probably going over there because it's like, well, if there's roots growing there, that means there's resources. There has to be nutrients, there has to be water, and this is gonna, give it a potential a better chance of survival, right? If another plant already exists in that area, it's gonna purposely try to extend its roots that way to be able to access those resources. But there's also what is called the wood wide web, in which there are some trees that are actually able to be connected via these fungal networks. So they create these relationships with fungi where they give the fungi sugars, and the fungi, through different methods. There are some fungi that actually pierce the roots. And then there's others that just create a little sheath kind of around the root, so it's not actually entering the root tissue. Buddy, come on. What are you doing? But there's so many different ways that the fungi might interact with the roots. But what ends up happening is that they create this relationship. So the tree will feed the roots, I'm sorry, the fungi some sugars, and the fungi in turn will supply different types of bioavailable materials that it's able to kind of digest, because fungi, their mycelial network, they release enzymes and basically digest their food on the outside and then consume it. And so they might be able to unlock like carbon, certain types of nutrients at a much faster rate than it would take for the roots of the plant to be able to access them. So they'll create this very symbiotic relationship. And then what also ends up happening is that through these connections, the roots will connect to other roots of other trees. And this can also be kind of a super highway, is theorized, of communication as well. And this is why certain forests, right, can become these super organisms where they're connected by these mycelial networks. There's also been studies that have found that some certain trees actually of the same species will graft their roots together. And mother trees, for instance, will continue to give sugars to their offspring, so to smaller trees, because maybe that tree might not be able to be at 100%. It might be really shaded by the mother tree itself, so it's not able to kind of collect enough sugars, and so the mother tree will supplement that. It's very, very interesting. There's so much more about this, especially in that book, The Secret Life of Trees, if this is something that is of interest. And I wanted to leave you with this exercise, especially for folks that are really just starting to build up their appreciation for plants. But I think sometimes a lot of folks just take plants for granted. And so we tend to not realize how immersed, right, our cultures, our livelihoods are surrounded by plants. So when you wake up tomorrow, try to see if you can count how many times you're actually interacting with something derived from plants. So this could be, I put a couple examples, like your toilet paper is paper. You're having coffee, right? That's coming from a plant. What kind of foods are you having that are coming from plants? Maybe you're sleeping on cotton sheets. Just all these things that you might not have realized are actually coming from plants, and just how they actually are around you in so many different ways, whether things you're consuming or things that you just have around you, furniture, books. There's so many ways that plants are kind of in our daily lives, and that if they were no longer in our lives, that would definitely alter our quality of life. And so just a cool exercise to consider. Yes, Maple. Maple has just, I don't know. You want to come up? You want to come up here? Okay, we're going to get a visit from Maple because he seems to really want attention today. So here we go. So next week we'll have a general Q&A. Oh, thank you, buddy. We'll have a general Q&A. And if anyone is interested in sharing some plants, so if you have cuttings Right now, this would be US based because we wouldn't be able to send the plants internationally. Thank you, Maple. But there is a QR code and you can access the sheet. If you have any issues, let me know. But you can add your information, plants that you might want to share, and yeah, and then we can connect and just ship to each other and have, you know, some plant swaps if that's of interest. Of course, I'm keeping these classes free for the Urban Garden Learning Series, but if you ever do want to offer anything, of course, it's always welcome, but it's not necessary. But it's always appreciated, of course. Folks have asked me to keep remembering to put this up, and because they'll email me and ask me, oh, you didn't put up your Venmo. So here it is. If you'd be interested. Oh, now you want to get off, Maple? Okay. Also, the Patreon is live. Now that I'm doing this partnership with NYBG, I'm going to start, there's going to be a lot more content being generated. So I might start putting a lot of things on there. So if that's of interest, that is live. Also, there is an Amazon shopping list. So it's not like an affiliate list or anything. It's just a list of things that I've bought personally that I really love. And I kind of compile them into a list. And so if you're looking for anything cool, that is readily available there if you'd want to see. And these are all things that I've bought myself and that I have and I've used. So I didn't put anything there that I bought that I didn't like. So no worries. So those are all just recommendations of things that I've purchased myself that I've used for my plants in one way or another. And so I've made that accessible. So feel free. And if you have ideas of things you think I should add to the list, let me know and I can do that, because I think the editing function is disabled. So just let me know, send me the link, and then I can attach it to our shopping list here. And of course, if you'd like to reach out with any questions, info@urbangarden.eco. On Instagram, same, urbangarden.eco, as well as the website. So definitely feel free to reach out there. I do also want to let you know that there is let me stop the share for a second. If I can stop the share. There we go. There we go. That I filmed a webinar last week with two other flower essence therapists. And so we did a whole class on flower essences, and that is going to be free. It's currently getting edited. It's very short. It's like 40 minutes or so, but it's more of like a panel discussion. We talk about plants, how to use, flower essences and how to use them, potentially use them in a community setting, why we really love flower essences. But we put together some like PDFs. So there is a list of 2 pages worth of book recommendations. There's a introduction to flower essence guide, and there's also a guide with working with flower essences and integrating it into your herbal practice. So if you're already working with different types of herbal preparations, how you could kind of integrate flower essences into that, whether for yourself or when working with others. And so I think each of those, one is like 14 pages, and I think another one is like 12 pages. So they aren't really, really long, but there's a lot of great information in there. And for the one for working with communities, I put a bunch of examples on how you can use them, which I hope will be really helpful. And I'm currently working on a longer one that one's going to be available further down the line. But I am working on an even larger one. I was working on that one and it was getting over 30 pages. And then we had this deadline. And so I said, okay, I think it makes more sense for me to take like the introduction section I did and make that its own little guidebook. And then I will work on the longer one. I think I was being a little overzealous there. I was like, yeah, I gave myself way too much work for the time that I had. So that is shelved, but we'll continue to do that. And yeah, so if anyone is interested in flower essences, I'll be making the link available, and I'll be sharing out those the e-guides and everything as well, so that you can check them out. But yeah, flower essences, I still have them on my desk since we were doing the class, but I have so many flower essences. I love flower essences. And so I hope that this is a cool kind of introduction to folks who have never heard of them. And yeah, and I'm hoping to do like we're going to be doing kind of a little video series as well, that will introduce folks, and that's also kind of further down the line, but will be much more of like a course, like a video course, versus a panel discussion. But we will also be doing a Q&A on Instagram Live, and I'll make sure once we have that date, I think it's July 11th, I will verify and let you know. But we're going to be doing an Instagram Live, so if you have any questions, you can let me know and we can answer them during the live if you're not able to make it, because it will be recorded. And so we'll have that for folks to watch if they didn't catch it when we were actually live. So yeah, so excited about that. And yeah, there's a bunch of panels that we're planning out. I'm also I did this book review on this great book called Radical Remedies, and it's about self-care for herbalists, and I'm going to be interviewing the author, and so we're going to be setting that up. So that actually might be an Instagram Live thing too. So if it is, I'll let you know in case folks are interested and want to catch it. But the blog is available. And I can post that in Facebook. It's on the Herbalists Without Borders website. But yeah. Yeah, you're very, very welcome, Wilma. Thank you, Deanna.
You're welcome.
Yes, Suzanne. Yes, without plants, there would be no meat. Yes, that's absolutely true. Yes, Anthony, thank you so much for sharing that. What a Plant Knows. There is a course. Let me quickly pull that up. The author, I think Daniel Chamovitz, if I'm remembering the author's name correctly. He did a free course on Coursera. What a Plant Knows. It's a 2-part course. So just so that you're aware, here we go. And it's free. And it looks like the next session is actually starting today. It says starts July 1st, and you enroll for free. It's a free class. It's pre-recorded. And then there's quizzes that you can complete. But he basically takes you through the book and provides supplemental reading materials that he based his research, that he like researched and based his book on. So it's really cool if you really want to do a deeper dive into understanding how plants perceive the world around them. So he kind of, throughout the book, he's basically trying to show, okay, how do they, if we try to, again, anthropomorphize, but basically how do plants, use their senses? So how do they see? How do they smell? How do they taste? How do they feel? And things like that. So how do they hear? And just basically how are plants able to kind of work with that stimuli in their capacity, of course, to kind of elicit the same thing. It's kind of like they might be not listening to sound specifically, but they're picking up on these vibrations, on these waves. There's also, if you're not aware, there's this really cool plant that dances. It's the dancing plant. Let me see if I can pull it up. But it reacts to flute playing. Let me see. So as you can see, the plant is just reacting to the sound waves, essentially. So it's not a very fast kind of moving thing, but it starts to kind of tick and move. And there's actually folks that grow these plants in pots, and they will bring them around, and kind of like where folks that do this with cobras and things like that, so they'll do this, but with the plant, and they'll play a flute, and it's a song that the plant has kind of learned, because the person will play the same song over and over again. And it once it like registers that song, it will start to do certain movements. And so it kind of becomes a little bit more predictable, like what kind of movements they'll make. It's really, really weird and super cool. So another weird fun fact. But yeah, it is something that you're able to check out, and I would highly recommend that you do so. And then let me show you. So there is this as well, that I am sharing out with the group. I will put it into I will put it into Facebook, and I'll put it out in the next email. Here we go. I'm just trying to pull it up so I can show you. There we go. There we go. So I can show you. So I made this interactive library, and so I'm going to continue building it out, but for now, this is like the first wave of books. And so it's open source library. So it's a bunch of books that are actually available online, that you're free to download and read, and check out. And so I have these lists that I've compiled, and so I'm putting this into these little bookshelves. And so it's kind of easier than looking at just a list of books. And then they're downloadable. So you can actually download the PDF, and you can click on the picture, and it opens up the book for you. So these were a lot of fun to make. And so yeah, there's a bunch of these here. And I'll be making a lot more. So right now I think there are 7, 8, 9. So there's 19 books on here right now, and all about like botany. There's also some like herbal books here. So some historical like plant lore. And so yeah, this is ready to be shared out. So I'll be sharing this out with folks if this is cool, if this is of interest. I'm going to be making a lot more of them. Oh, you're very welcome. Where is the bookshelf? Yes. So I'll share that out. I'll share it out in the email. I'll be posting it on Facebook. You can also email me if you'd prefer just me to email it directly to you. But yeah, so I made those, and it's a lot of fun to make. So yeah, and then you'll be able to access it. So I'll post it today on Facebook, and then yeah, I can send it out. I'm gonna send out that survey email, so I think I'll just send it there too, to let folks know about the flower essence materials, about these materials, and about doing a survey for potential topics for other classes that we could offer. So yeah, so I hope that was cool. I hope that was interesting. I kind of just really, I know I've gotten a lot of feedback from some folks that they wanted me to kind of get more into a little bit more into the botany. So I wanted just to do a couple of classes talking about botany. But yeah, how to get on the email list. So there is the opt-in on my website. And so let me pull that up. Urbangarden.eco. And then I'll post that here. There we go. And so when you go onto the website, it pops up automatically for you to join in. And so that you're able to register. I'm also offering, I'm going to be offering some introduction to botany for herbalists. And so this is going to be a course that I'm going to be offering. I'm going to do, it's potentially going to be either 4 or 6 weeks. I'm trying to see if I want them to be 2-hour classes or like 1.5 hour classes. I'm sorry, hour or like 2-hour classes. So those I'm trying to see if I'm going to do a series of 4 or 6, and it's going to be free to all of my students and to members of Herbalists Without Borders, and only the folks that are on Eventbrite. Then if they're not members of HWB or they're not on my mailing list, they can purchase, a ticket, so they don't have to be a member if they don't want to be, so they have the option to join the class if they'd like to. And I'll be releasing those details soon as well, because it's going to be like a limited series. I am going to do it again, of course, but I'll share out the upcoming dates, so if that's of interest for folks. But yeah. But thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, for hanging out. I hope that you're having a really great holiday weekend. We got out to a barbecue on Saturday, and then yesterday we actually helped my little brother move into his new apartment. So we've had a very busy weekend. So today it's teaching. I have some meetings after this, and then I can try to just relax tomorrow. So I kind of don't want to do anything tomorrow. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. But I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their holiday and get some relaxation time, some plant time into. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope I'll see you next week for the Q&A. And feel free to email me if you'd prefer me to kind of send you anything that I mentioned. And yeah, so check out that Coursera course if that's of interest. But thank you so much, everyone. Have a great one. Happy 4th, everyone. Happy 4th.